believe it or not, we've already studied relative clauses several times, and the ones we've looked at first had a dependent clause that was introduced by the relative pronoun qui, quae, quod, and the verb in the dependent clause has been in the indicative. Now, it's in the indicative because the clause reported a fact about the antecedent. Let's take a look at one of these in English. Hannibal was the Carthaginian leader who brought elephants across the Alps into Italy. So we've got this who as the relative pronoun. The antecedent, who is the who referring to? Back to the subject in this case, Hannibal. And then we have to ask ourselves, what was the reported fact? Remember, that's why it's indicative, because it's a fact. And the fact is about Hannibal is that he brought elephants across the Alps into Italy. Okay, relatively easy. I know those were hard at the time, but compared to what you've learned, those are easy. Now, you also studied relative clauses that appear with a verb in the subjunctive mood, and they're also introduced by a relative pronoun followed by a subjunctive verb. Okay, so first one was purpose clause. Now, you should have no difficulty recognizing a purpose clause, right? You're going to look for a dependent clause introduced by an ut or ne, and it ends with a subjunctive verb. And it answers the question why or for what purpose, which is why it's called a purpose clause. So if I said, Huc venimus ut requiesceremus. So there is our clause. All right, and it can be translated, we came here so that we might relax, or we came here to relax. You could also say we came here in order to relax. There's a bunch of different ways. So, but the most important thing is it tells us why or for what purpose. Why did we come here? Well, we came here so that we could relax. Relatively easy. Last one that you did was a result clause. And a result clause is also introduced by an ut, never by a ne. Now, the main clause contains an adverb or adjective degree that triggers the result clause, and purpose clauses don't contain a trigger. And the result clause follows the sequence of tenses, and in English, when you translate, frequently the conjunction translates as that. So let's take a look at one of these. Tanta fecit ut hostes seravet. So here's our dependent clause starting with ut, ending with the verb that's subjunctive in the sequence of tenses. He did such great things that he saved the hostages. What was the result of him doing such great things? Well, he was able to save the hostages because of it. So remember, a purpose clause expresses why something is being done, and a result clause expresses the actual outcome. And even though it is a fact, it still takes the subjunctive. It's just one of those weird Latin grammar rules you just have to be okay with. All right, what we're going to talk about today, though, is the relative clause of characteristic. So when the relative clause has a subjunctive verb and does not show purpose or result, it's called a relative clause of characteristics. And this clause describes some general quality of the antecedent. It's not really specific. It's general, indefinite, interrogative, or negative. But the most important thing to know is it's a general quality of the antecedent. Let's take a look at a couple of these. So, Nemo erat qui hoc sciret. So here's our phrase. Who knew this? There was no one who knew this. So what's our general kind of terms? No one. It's not being specific. Sunt qui hoc faciant. There are some who do this. Very general. Who are they? Some, right? Hic est liber quem omnes legant. This is the kind of book which all would read. And I want to tell you that sometimes you'll see this auxiliary verb would in here. You could also say which all read, but sometimes that would will show up. And so what is it? Some general kind of book, right? And the last one is quis est qui hanc fabulum dubitet. And it's in the interrogative. Who is there who doubts this story? Again, the very general kind of person they're talking about, or subject is a who. So phrases you'll often see is sunt qui. You've seen that right up here. Quis est qui. You saw that right here. Who is there? Who. Sometimes, again, the auxiliary verb would is used in the English translation. And certain adjectives like dignus, indignus, and aptus may also introduce a characteristic clause. I will give you an example here. Princeps est dignus qui honorem rapiat. A prince is worthy to receive honor. A bunch of different ways you could say this. A prince is worthy who would receive honor, or a prince is worthy who receives honor. Same kind of thing there. Now, here's the interesting thing to note. The relative clause in something with an adjective here is dependent on the adjective. So even though prince is a specific subject, what the clause is talking about is not the prince, but it's about his worthiness. That's where we get something that's not quite specific. Worthy is not specific. So the only thing you need to learn this week is relative clause of characteristic. Most important thing is has a subjunctive verb, does not show purpose or result. So it eliminates the other two. It describes some general quality of something. So that is just called a relative clause of characteristic.